Hello, Eisenhower community. This is Mr. Stein. I just wanted to give a update on our school growth plan for June. I hope everybody is enjoying their summer. To start, just want to bring to surface our mission, vision, and core values. Our mission is ultimately why we exist, right? To foster a learning environment for all students who feel affirmed, and ultimately are able to thrive academically and socially, emotionally. Our vision is ultimately what we aspire to be. And we hope every student is seen, heard, and valued at Eisenhower, and they are experiencing a student-centered learning community, and we stand for high expectations for all. Our values are what govern us and how we decide how we behave, and what decisions we make are based off our values. We believe all students can learn and will grow. We believe in positive relationships. We believe in collective efficacy and collaboration working together. We're very fortunate to have a very diverse student body. So welcoming all identities to Eisenhower and ultimately honoring all voices from staff, families to students as well. Looking at our two academic-based goals for the past 2 years, we wanted to see a 10% increase in forward ELA reading scores from 36% to about 46%. Unfortunately, we do not have the forward results from this school year. DPI, the Department of Instruction, changed how the forward was operating this year, so they need more time to get the results out. I anticipate having the results in late July. So you hear me speak a lot today about our STAR assessment results compared to our forward, just because we don't have our forward results. Similarly, we want to see a 10% increase in a targeted group of students for math. Last year, they were about 19.5% proficiency, and we want to obviously see it increase to a little under 30% at 29%. Similarly, no forward results yet for math. We'll hope to have them in July, and I'll share them out as well once we have them. Looking at our action plan, obviously very unique circumstances this year at Eisenhower, welcoming 37 new staff members. If you look at globally from the last 3 years, only about 20% of the staff members who are currently at Eisenhower were here 3 years ago. So it was a really good opportunity to just kind of reset, obviously, and kind of decide how we want to move forward and ultimately establish an instructional vision for us here at Eisenhower. Looking at our action steps, PACE, which is that common planning time and collaboration time for staff. We made a commitment this year as a district and a school to make sure staff had an opportunity to collaborate within their grade levels, which ultimately led to problem-solving conversations, digging the data, and ultimately helping informing instruction to see some nice positive growth out of our students. We were very fortunate to have two wonderful instructional coaches, Miss Miller and Miss League. We spent a lot of time around small group instruction. So small group instruction is there's a mini lesson part of reading or math or writing, and then kids break off, could be working independently while the teacher brings in maybe 3 or 4 students for a small group that's really targeted on what those students need. This is in addition to our Eagle Time or Win Time. And ultimately, we were very fortunate to have SK in first grade participate in the new ELA curriculum pilot this spring. All grades will have it next year, with the exception of junior kindergarten. We're very excited that we had 2 grade levels participate in that. Ultimately, the coaches provided an opportunity to really dig into our instructional levers, provide data, and kind of analyze data of teachers to help establish efficient and productive instructional routines. And then really a lot of phonics instruction at the younger grade levels to help our emerging readers continue to grow. I talked a lot about it this year about the social emotional steps and processes to help make sure our students are ultimately available to learn. I think I made mention of it. One of my earlier assessments of the year was I don't know if we had a large portion of our students available to learn at all times back in the fall. Through the SEL support and SST process, we are able to develop a number of systems and supports for individual students as well as holistically for the whole school, which we saw tremendous impacts. First time ever we've had an SEL curriculum here at Eisenhower. We had a tiered-based intervention system that was based off of behavior referrals, teacher inputs, and a couple other metrics as well, which kicked off a number of different supports for some of our students. And we also had a clearly defined process for this. A process needs to be predictable, replicable, and that's what we were able to do. And then ultimately, we were very fortunate to have two SEL specialists, a full-time social worker, a half-time psych here, which have all made a really big impact on lowering our behavior data, making students available to learn at Eisenhower. And I'll get into the behavioral data in a minute. And obviously, it directly connects to our growth academically. Huge opportunity this year when we stepped in was a PBIS implementation. We clearly defined what it means to be a soaring eagle. So safe, open-minded, and ready to learn. We spent a lot of time reteaching expectations. A lot of research says that students need to be retaught something more than 20 times. Adults need more than 30 times. So that was a huge emphasis this year that we were going to really reteach after any break, assembly, concerts, all the expectations for those. And we saw a really nice positive change in behavior here at Eisenhower. PBS regularly reviewed behavioral data, which ultimately led to a lot of our challenges at Eisenhower. The monthly challenges, wherever the behaviors kind of seemed to be creeping up the month before, is where we identified our next challenge. We also Eagle extravaganzas, right? Helped create culture here at Eisenhower. We honored students through Eagle Eyes, Golden Trophies. We did a lot of attendance challenges. Our attendance rate was about 91% at the beginning of the year, which really anything above 90 is pretty good. We got up to over 94% by the end of the year, which is just fantastic, which had a huge impact on our school culture and ultimately teaching what it means to be a soaring eagle. We can't just expect kids to do things. Kids are going to kid. So we need to teach our expectations, and we have set a really nice foundation, and we'll continue to evaluate that work. Next year, we have a team of about 12 staff members for PBIS, so I'll help bring that work and continue to make it productive here at Eisenhower. Other than that, I mentioned it earlier, we had participation in the Benchmark Advanced Pilot. Once again, that is going to be our new ELA curriculum for everybody next year. Last year, we had SK in first grade be able to participate. Really excited about it. Standards-based curriculum, grade level reading text available for all readers. If we follow the curriculum, every state standard will be taught a minimum of 3 times next school year. Obviously, some standards will be more based off of emphasis, which I think will be the first time we could ever say that. So SK in first grade, we're able to lead the way in that. Eagle Time, which is ultimately our tier 2 intervention. So we identified students through STAR results, and that was able additional support and small group instruction based off of data. Some grades, 4th grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, did some flexible grouping, which means that maybe a student had Mr. Schill, but had some emerging skills in one standard, and Miss Millard was leading a small group during Eagle Time in that for those 30 minutes, and that student would go from Mr. Schill's class to Miss Millard's class to work with students who all need the same support on that skill. Saw a lot of progress with Eagle Time this year. Had a long conversation with 5th grade. They really wanted to focus on math. And from winter to star results, we saw a over 7% increase in proficiencies in 5th grade alone. Number of reasons for that, but Eagle Time had a huge impact on that. Ultimately, we trusted the process, right? This is something that came in, we didn't really have clearly defined here at Eisenhower, and we made it through our BLT and defined it this year and had a really productive and saw a lot of growth because of it in the spring. Also, Graham Fletcher is a math resource. Mr. Schill, Mr. Schill, Miss Miller went to a training and paid that training forward in the fall. And we saw a lot of instructional improvement based off of the work they did there, and the Georgia Numeracy project as well. We'll continue to build out what that will look like next year at Eisenhower as well, but we saw some nice positive growth. When you welcome 37 staff members to Eisenhower this year, there's a number of things that we needed to address just to gain some overall understanding of who we are at Eisenhower and what we're going to do. So here's just a list of all the professional learning that our staff engaged in. I am very proud and honored to work with the staff. Everyone jumped in and kind of realized it was a very unique situation, and came ready to learn every single time we led PD. It focused from honestly just how we Eisenhower, how do we do dismissal? How do we do fire drills? All those things you have to do when you have 37 staff members. And it shifted to instructional practices tied to how do you use decodable readers in your space? How do you become clear in your instruction through learning targets? Really this spring, we spent a lot of time focusing on small group instruction, like I mentioned, and also setting the stage next year for rigor and our levels of questioning. So when a teacher poses a question, there's different levels. Level one is very simple questions, recall. It goes all the way to level four. Level four is really bringing in multiple resources, having students analyze and ultimately and evaluate and ultimately make kind of their own opinions on things. So we're going to really shift to make sure we're landing on more higher order thinking questions next year. We really set the stage this spring tied to that. When we'll kick that work back off in the fall. Ultimately, the last bullet point in the bottom there is all this PD helped create a clarity of what instruction looks like at Eisenhower and who we are as instructional leaders and an instructional organization and learning organization. I mentioned this in our last impact cycle for the community is we had a lot of pillars this spring from small group instruction, Eagle time implementation, focus on rigor, pace implementation, and academic culture. Academic culture is all things learning. How do we make sure students are coming to learn? How do we make sure staff are showing up every single day to provide the best opportunity for our students to learn? The graphics on the pillar is just a change continuum in education and leadership. Anything from exploring to extending, right? So exploring really ties into we are just exploring what it looks like. Engaging is we're having select groups of staff engaging into it, refining expectations. I mean, this is what we're doing. So small group instruction, that's what we're doing. Eagle time, that's what we're doing. You'll see engage is something I talked about a minute ago about rigor. Really trying to build that out to increasing our ability to have higher order thinking. Pace mentioned earlier is that small group grade breakdown where they get to collaborate, teachers get to collaborate in academic culture as well. So you'll hopefully, as we progress, you'll see these pillars move more and more to the right as we continue to shape what Eisenhower looks like in the future. Now into the data. Goal number one, highest to reading scores. These are star results for overall SGP, which is growth points. This is one of the most important indicators for us because ultimately we want to make sure students are growing. You can see on the right there the reading graph. So we had about 68.9% of students hit the SGP for the spring compared to the fall. This is an increase of almost 3% from the winter. This was an increase of 6% from the fall. And this is also higher than the district average. For early literacy, which is the graph on the left, we saw slight change. Early literacy is our younger grade levels this spring. Overall proficiencies, left graph is reading all the way to about 53.4%, which this was an increase of 9.1% from the fall, which is just fantastic. This is the obviously the highest proficiency rate you can see in the graph since we started STAR testing, which is also great and is also slightly higher than the district average. So really a lot to celebrate there with our overall reading proficiencies in STAR. Once again, this is just one metric of measurement. We'll see more of our, I'm sure we'll see more of our improvement and progress when the forward comes out. There's been a trend, as you can see, of spring scores remaining pretty stagnant across the time at Eisenhower. Happy to say we broke that this spring. On the right is early literacy. Saw an increase of almost over 8% from the winter. Sorry, over 10% from the winter, which is just fantastic. We attribute this to all the things I talked about: pace, small group instruction, data-informed win time, the pilot, which I'll get into some more, and ultimately using data to inform our instruction. From a disproportionality standpoint, you can see that we closed the gap in tied to our target group. In the winter, we had the highest proficiency rate for our targeted group. We saw a slight decrease. The spring overall, we saw an increase of 14.5% from the spring to the fall to the spring, which is great. Once again, contributed to all the things we did: PACE, small group instruction, Eagle Time, SST process, all the professional learning as well. FastBridge, which is our SK, JK, and first grade students engaged in that. You can see a nice growth in JK, which is the graph on the left. We saw a slight decrease in SK in first grade from the beginning of the year. Had a lot of conversations around this. Once again, only one metric with our teachers. FastBridged is a time test, which ultimately means we got to help students become more fluent with their automaticity. Also need repeated exposure um, to these areas that are being assessed. And a lot of times practices in isolation. So we got to make sure the students be able to generalize more, and we will that will be an emphasis moving forward, and we will see some um, positive results moving forward next year. Really want to mention some of this as well. This is second grade and first grade. So, first grade FastBridge. I want to identify that this is the group that participated in the pilot. So we saw some really positive results uh, from the impact of the pilot this spring. Second grade, we saw a very nice decrease in students identified needing additional support. This is a lot of work for second grade who jumped right into that tiered intervention group right off the bat. Additionally, we saw through our work with Miss Mamiak and Miss Young, a decrease of students who received tier 3 intervention from those two providers, which was fantastic, a testament to their work as well. We also, very important, the kids who were dismissed from tier 3 instruction ultimately did not pop back up and needing tier 3 instruction later in the year, which is ultimately a metric of success, right? If we have a student intervention, we dismiss them from intervention, which is ultimately the goal, and they don't pop back up as needing it again in the future, is just fantastic. Overall, math proficiencies, we saw an increase of nearly 4% overall. Our target group saw an increase of 2.4% about. Some work that needs to continue with math. Overall, we saw increases across the board, which is fantastic. Similarly, this is SGP graphs. So students' progress. You can see historically, right? We saw a very nice increase in students' growth over the year, over 70% in the winter, and then 67.1% in the spring. Really nice increase across the board, right around the district average overall for the spring this year, which is fantastic. Once again, it's all about how we're growing kids, and these graphs demonstrate our progress over the years and making sure students are growing math. Our last goal ties to students' perception of feeling safe at Eisenhower, tied to our student perception survey data. Interestingly enough, we didn't necessarily move the metric in the survey, which I found really interesting, because I'll get into them in a minute. All metrics beside the survey question improved from rapid decrease of behaviors and other elements as well. So it's interesting that the survey results didn't necessarily for this question yield the results we were hoping for, but the other metrics definitely indicate huge progress here at Eisenhower. Some of these things I already mentioned: SST process, clear defined support for students, and ultimately what triggers students to get that support, from say groups, small groups, from check-in, check-out, to huddles, to behavior plans. This group met weekly to discuss support for students, and we are continuing to increase teacher input to this process. PBS mentioned all the things earlier. Huge impact at Eisenhower as a culture standpoint, ultimately what it means to be a soaring eagle. There's a teaming structure called huddling. It's really tied to special education and coming around a student, how to best support them as learners. So we adapted this process and teaming structure to ultimately support learners who were exhibiting unexpected behaviors throughout the year, and saw a nice positive impact. SEL lessons, second step, anti-bullying lessons, Miss Green participated and gave fifth grade additional SEL lessons, similarly a class in SK as well. We saw a nice, tremendous impact on that. Ultimately, we are also looking to increase extracurricular activities. We had a principal advisory committee this year with fourth and fifth graders, Girls on the Run. From just want to thank Miss Hemsey, Miss Olenichek, Miss Reinhofer for leading that organization out. Huge success, great run earlier in May with all the participants, families, staff members who all came out. We'll look to build that program out as well. Also, a lot of conversations around impact of Mr. Kriegel. Obviously, Mr. Kriegel joined us in late February, and he's had a tremendous impact at Eisenhower. He provides a really unique perspective from being a counselor. He joined our SST process right away, had a huge impact on major and minor data. Also, another voice, an opinion in problem-solving conversations. We ultimately allowed me to get in the classrooms and kind of work with teachers, identifying our instructional vision moving forward, which I mentioned earlier is rigor. So that's a testament to the role of the dean and the impact it's had and Mr. Kriegel's work here at Eisenhower. Big pillars this spring: PBIS implementation and SST process, social emotionally. A little different. We kind of built these two things up from the ground here. Nothing was in place, so it was a great work from all the members of the community and team involved in this work. We're at the extend process, so this summer we are going to be digging in and evaluating the work of these groups. And then continuing to extend it and add certain elements to it to continue to grow that process out to make sure we're meeting the needs of all learners. Getting into data, like I mentioned, very stagnant growth in the stat or in the student survey, which I found interesting. You look at the result on the bottom there of 95.5% of families feel Eisenhower is safe. So those scores naturally don't necessarily match up. When looking at our behavior data, huge. The orange line is from last year. The blue line is from this year. So you can see a huge decrease, about a 52% decrease in overall behavior referrals from last year to this year. Majors were about 58% decrease. Minors were about a 52 or 53% decrease across the entire year. So huge decrease. Mentioned the impact of Mr. Kriegel comes right here, right? Starts in late February. And then we see a nice decrease of majors here for the rest of the year. And one of the things we can contribute that to is ultimately the addition of the dean and the impact of Mr. Kriegel. Huge area of growth for us is our behavior data broken down into disproportionality. You can see that we are overrepresentative of our students of color in our behavior data. We're about 55% of our student populations are students of color, but unfortunately, our students of color make up nearly 75% of our data in terms of DisPro. So that's something we identified, did a root cause analysis, and we'll be discussing more at length in our next school growth plan. Similarly, students with IEPs are overrepresented in majors at almost 68%, and then almost 34% at the minor level. Students with disabilities make up about 13 to 14% here at Eisenhower. Overall, this is our tracker. You can see on the right, anything in green showed growth. Anything in that bright red pinkish showed a little decline. Mentioned some of those things are next steps for that. So this is a tracker that's online. We'll have a similar tracker moving forward for our next school growth plan. So what's next for Eisenhower? A lot of work is going to be coming down this summer. We have a new school growth plan coming into place. It's a 2-year process. Our SLT, which used to be our BLT, Building Leadership Team, is being listed, turned to School Learning Team. We are meeting 3 times this summer to really build out our school growth plan and our action steps moving forward for Eisenhower. As instructionally, we're going to focus on rigor. Ultimately, we can ask all the high-level thinking questions we want, but if we don't create access points for students, there's no engagement. So that will be more of our work as well. That also ties into behavioral data, right? If students are being removed from class, they're not accessing their learning. So that is something we'll continue to focus on. And then ultimately, we'll continue to refine our PBIS and SST processes to support all learners here at Eisenhower. I just want to send a thank you to everybody in the Eisenhower community. It's been a fun year. It's been an exhausting year. We saw a lot of progress. Obviously, when we started this year, Eisenhower was in a unique position, and I'm happy to say that we are in a better position than we were a year ago. And that comes from all the work that students have put in, all the work that staff have put in. Can't thank them enough. It hasn't been easy, but they have stayed with it and worked through any challenges that have arisen. And then ultimately, all the encouragement from the community and having our back and supporting us along the way and understanding that it's a process and not everything is going to be a quick fix. So we saw a lot of progress this year, as I mentioned, and I'm excited to see where we head in the future. I hope everybody has a great summer. Soar Eagles.